Welcome to the second edition of the undisputed best tier list in Clash Royale. So my ranking system is pretty self-explanatory. I basically wrote it out on the screen, but for those of you who are listening to audio only, we are starting off with the best tier, which is OP, please nerf, which is self-explanatory. S tier needs a slight nerf. A tier is a little bit above average. B tier is a little bit below average. C tier, it needs a tiny bit of a buff, but not too much. D tier is not good. It needs a pretty sizable buff to make it into the meta. And then the last tier doesn't even have a letter because it is so bad that nobody's going to use these cards unless they have them over leveled. To start off the video, I don't have Royal Delivery in this tier list, so we're just going to put Royal Delivery imaginarily in the C tier, and then we're just going to move on. So starting off here, the Skeletons and the Ice Spirit are going to stay the same. They're going to be an above average. They fit into a wide variety of decks, but I definitely wouldn't say they need a buff or a nerf. But yeah, they're a little bit more powerful than the average card. And here we actually have the Heal, which changed to the Heal Spirit. And at first I thought this card was really powerful, and I almost would have put it in S tier or OP, please nerf. But after testing it out and playing around with it, it really only works in like Royal Hogs and maybe even like Elixir Golem. So it doesn't really combo that well with like a Hog Rider. It kind of works in Balloon. So yeah, it's good, but it definitely doesn't really need a nerf. Next up, we have the Log, which again goes into the A tier. It's probably like the best of the small spells, but I wouldn't say that it's so good that it's going to need a nerf. Next up, we have the Rage, which fits into like 2 decks in the meta. It fits a little bit into Elixir Golem and a little bit into Sparky. But overall, it's the only reason I'm not even putting it in literally trash is just because it fits into those 2 decks, but it's really not the best card. Next up, we have the Spirit Goblins, which are going in below average because, quite frankly, they're not that popular. They're kind of seen a little bit in Skeleton Barrel, now that Skeleton Barrel is a lot more powerful. So you could make an argument that they go into the above average tier, but I would say that because they're weaker than like the Skeletons and the Ice Spirit in general and just not quite as popular, that they're going to be in the B tier for me. The Barb Barrel is it's a different situation log basically. It's better versus ranged troops such as, Musketeer, the Executioner, but it's going to be worse versus the things that a Barb Barrel is actually, or that a log would kill because it has that smaller radius. But it's still definitely a very good card. The Ice Golem is going into the A tier for me. It's just really good at kiting stuff. I mean, there's really no other way to say it. Has a wide range of utility. Snowball also going in the A tier. It's a very good spell. It has a slower, deploy time than the Zap, but overall it's still very good. And speaking of the Zap, we're also going to put Zap in there because it's more instant, but it doesn't have the knockback like the Snowball. So they're both good cards, but they have different utilities. The Goblins are going to go in the B tier. They are very good, but just not quite as good as the other cards in the A tier. We're going to put the Wall Breakers in the A tier. For a while, they might have even been S tier, to be honest with you, but they did nerf the Wall Breakers, and they also nerfed the Miners, so they're not as popular and as strong as they used to be. I'm actually sticking the Bats in the S tier just because, and this is honestly, I would probably stick them in the A tier, but a lot of people on Twitter complain about Bats. They're like, man, Bats are too powerful. And I can definitely see where they're coming from because so many people use Bats like in the top 10. Last season, the #1 player had Bats in his deck. He was using a giant Magic Archer deck. So there is definitely an argument that Bats are really, really strong. Mainly just because you put them in a cheap cycle deck and you out-cycle like their Zap or their Snowball, and your opponent's just going to have no answer for them. Fire Spirits are going into the not good tier. They definitely need a buff, and I don't think it would be oppressive to the meta if they received a buff, but the real question is, how do you buff the Fire Spirits, which I think is why they haven't buffed them yet, but yeah, they're definitely on the weak side. Goblin Barrel is going in, I'm actually moving it up a tier since the last video. It's going in the below average. I would say that Goblin Barrel's in a pretty good spot in the meta, or not really Goblin Barrel. Goblin Barrel isn't really that good of a card, but just Logbait in general. They buffed the Princess, so the Princess is pretty good right now, and like Tesla, Inferno Tower, they're all decent. So yeah, Logbait decks are doing quite well in the meta right now. The Knight is going into the A tier for me. It received a buff recently, and ever since that buff, it's just become one of the best cards in the game. I don't even remember what the buff was, but I just know that it's gotten better. Elixir Golem is actually going into the A tier. Now this is kind of a controversial card because for me it would low-key go even in the B tier or C tier, but because of how well it combos with the healer, which we're gonna get up to soon. I'm actually gonna move it up to earlier in the list because I want to talk about it. In combination with the healer, it's just a very good card, but without the healer, it's not that great. Fisherman. They buffed the Fisherman, but he just doesn't have enough health and doesn't do enough damage, and he's like a worse Tornado. They recently nerfed the Miner, so it's moving down from the S tier to the A tier for pretty obvious reasons. Still a good card, but definitely not the best card in the game anymore. Dark Goblin is going into the B tier. It's definitely a good card, but it's just very situational. Tornado is going up to the S tier. I would never like to see them change Tornado. I really like where Tornado's at, but there is no question that Tornado is a very good card, but I also think that it's good for the game. Tombstone is going to go in the B tier. It's kind of like a worse Bomb Tower. If they were to nerf the Bomb Tower, you'd probably see the Tombstone come back a little bit. Princess is going into the B tier. I like that. I don't even remember when they did it, but they changed the projectile radius or range, or no, they changed the attack speed. That's what it was. So yeah, it's good, but definitely not the best card in the game. We're also going to stick Firecracker in the B tier. This is a very situational card because when they don't have a counter to it, it can actually absolutely annihilate your opponent. But when they do have a counter to it, or they activate your King Tower, you can be in a lot of trouble. So it fits into a couple decks, but overall it's definitely not the best card in the game. Clone is going to go in the slight buff. It's going to be our first slight buff card. But I don't actually want them to buff it. But I think that it's a little bit below average just because Tornado is really meta and Tornado does quite well versus the Clone. Minions are going to go into the A tier. They're just a very good card. If your opponent has arrows, it's just an equal elixir trade on the minions, so it's not that big of a deal, and they're strong on defense and strong on offense. Skeleton Army is going to go into the slight buff tier. Again, I don't really actually want them to buff the Skeleton Army, but if your opponent has a zap or any small spell, there's really no question that it's just going to get annihilated like instantly, and a lot of times it doesn't do that much, although it does fit into a couple decks. Earthquake is going to go in A tier. It's very necessary in this meta with all of the, the Goblin Hut, the Barbarian Huts, all the Bomb Tower. Like a lot of decks use Earthquake, and it just works very well. Arrows are going to go into the A tier. Overall, they're a good card. I mean, they kill archers. Pretty much any 3 electric troop they kill, that's a bait card. So yeah, they just fit into a lot of decks right now. Ice Wizard is going into the S tier just because of how well it combos with Tornado. Without Tornado, it wouldn't really be that good of a card, but with Tornado, yeah, it's just a very strong combination. But again, I don't want to see them change it. Goblin Gang is going to go into the A tier. It's like the best of the bait cards. You can split it, it attacks ground and air, doesn't die to a zap, so overall it's pretty solid. The Royal Ghost is like a little bit worse of a bandit, but I don't know. They could buff it. It wouldn't really offend me, but also I think it's pretty good. It fits into a couple decks, so I'm happy with where the Royal Ghost is at. Archers are going to go into... I think they're going to go into the B tier for me. I had them in the A tier last time, and there's really no reason for them to be here. I guess because Arrows is quite good versus the Archers. So yeah, they're not the best card in the game, but they're still pretty good. Cannon just recently got a buff, so I'm sticking it in the B tier. I don't think it's quite made it up to the A tier yet, but it is a good card, and it has made 2.6 a lot better ever since the buff. The Guards are also going to go into the B tier. They're kind of like a worse Goblin Gang. They're really good if you want to counter like Mini P.E.K.K.A. or Prince, but versus like anything else, you'd rather have Goblin Gang in your deck. Skeleton Barrel just recently got a buff, and man is it annoying. Like it's like almost guaranteed chip damage on your tower, because if you defend it, you have to spend more elixir than the card is worth. So like you'd have to play archers and like skeletons, or archers and ice spear, or archers and log. But if you just log it or just zap it, it's going to get chip damage on your tower. So that's why I think it's too powerful, just because it's like you should be able to defend it without damage for even elixir. That is my opinion, and that's why I think it deserves a bit of a nerf. I actually like the change, but it just needs, a slight nerf. Bomber is going to go into the B tier. It's kind of like a worse Ice Wizard, but it's really good and really situational. So it fits into a couple decks, like especially Golem, but it's definitely, as I keep saying, not the best card in the game. Mega Minion is going to go into the A tier. It's good. They I don't know, they nerfed it like months ago, or maybe even a year ago. Before that, it used to be S tier, but right now it's just it's above average. Bandit is going back into the S tier for me again, and I mean overall it's just a really solid card. Not much to say. It has a lot of utilities, fits into a lot of decks, and just works quite well. The healer, and the healer is actually a card which, I don't know, it's kind of an annoying card. It's not actually that it's broken. It's definitely strong. In the decks that it's strong in, it's just like a joke how strong it is, but it doesn't fit into a lot of decks. Works really well with Ram Rider, works really well with Graveyard, with Elixir Golem. And in those decks, it's like broken, but with any other deck, it's not going to work that well. So yeah, I would like to see a little bit of a change. I'm not really sure what that would be yet. I think the healer definitely deserves a little bit of a nerf. Tesla is going into the A tier for me. It's not as good as the bomb tower, but it's like, well, it's not even the second best building. It used to be the second best building. It's like the fourth best building now after like Goblin Hut, Barbarian Hut, and Bomb Tower, but it still is quite a good card. The Goblin Cage is like, it's below average. It's a little bit worse building than like the Tesla, but it's on par with like Cannon and definitely a usable card. The Mortar, I'm putting in the B tier for this meta because of how popular Goblin Hut is, and Mortar just doesn't work versus Goblin Hut. I don't know what to say. The goblins go too fast, and it like misses the goblins. You can have Mortar and Earthquake in your deck, and you're not going to get past the Goblin Hut. I think I would put it back in the A tier if they nerf the Goblin Hut. Fireball is going into the A tier. It's a quite good card. Not much to say about it. Very well rounded. B tier, the Furnace. It's a good building, but it's definitely not broken. It's not seen in like a whole lot of decks, but you're going to see it. You're definitely going to see it. The Hog Rider is like a very good win condition. It's a very like new player friendly win condition, and it's a very high skill win condition that's hard to use. Overall, it's a little bit weak. You could give it like a 0.05 HP buff, and I think it would deserve it, but I wouldn't like to see a huge buff to Hog Rider. I would really like it where it's at. The Poison is going to go into the A tier. It's just very good. It's like, it does more damage than the Fireball, but it just takes longer and is good versus Graveyard. Freeze is really not that good of a card. I mean, not much to say about it. It only fits into like Balloon and Graveyard, and a lot of the times you'd rather have a different spell in the deck. Infernal Dragon is kind of like a worse Mega Minion, or honestly, it's kind of on par with the Mega Minion, but because there's so much bait and stuff, it's just not gonna really work out that well. It's especially good. Well, it takes a little bit too long to ramp up, I think, and like with Snowball, it's just, yeah, it's not the best. Valkyrie is going into the A tier. It's on par with the Knight, but just has different utility. The Bomb Tower is going into the S tier. Very good. I would like to see like maybe a slight HP nerf to the Bomb Tower, or a slight something. I don't want to see a huge nerf, just like a slight nerf, so it's still good, but just not as good as it is now. The Hunter is going to go into the B tier for me. It's a good card, but it only fits into a couple decks, which is why it's only B tier. The Zappies are going into the slight buff tier. They buffed them recently. They're almost there, but not quite yet. The Night Witch, I'm putting this in the B tier because, again, it's one of those cards that only fits into a couple decks, but it's very strong. The Musketeer is going to go into the S tier. Very solid card in the game. Fits into a lot of archetypes. It's really good in Quick Cycle. It's like probably the best range attacker, I would say, in the game. So yeah, it's pretty good. The Mini Tepeka is also going to go into the S tier. It's not as good in this meta because you're seeing a lot of spam and, Goblin Hut and a lot of things that counter the Mini P.E.K.K.A, but especially if the Goblin Hut goes away, if the Skeleton Barrel goes away, it's going to become kind of oppressive again. I would like to see like what some people have been saying on Twitter. The initial attack should be a little bit slower, and I think it would be a pretty good card for the game. Or even like an HP nerf wouldn't hurt my feelings. I don't know, just a slight nerf, but not a huge nerf. Just to get it back on par with the Lumberjack, maybe. The Magic Archer, it recently got a nerf. It went from S tier for me to C tier, and well, it doesn't even deserve to be in C tier. I don't know. I haven't really messed around with the Magic Archer that much, but it does activate King Tower. I think they went a little bit too far on the nerf. I would like to see a slight buff to it, maybe half a tile or something, just so it doesn't activate King Tower, I guess, and then I would be happy with where the Magic Archer's at. The Lumberjack's going into the B tier. It's kind of like a worse Mini P.E.K.K.A, but it has a rage effect, so it's still good. But yeah, not as good as Mini P.E.K.K.A. The Electro Wizard, I'm going to stick in the S tier. I'm expanding my S tier since last video, just from what I see in the meta and what I see people like talking about. According to Seth, the lead game balancer person. Electro Wizard has like one of the highest win rates in the game, but I don't think it should be changed, but apparently it's pretty good. Flying Machine is going in the B tier for me. It's actually really good in this meta, I think. I think Flying Machine is like a really underrated card right now because it's good versus Goblin Hut. You can fly it over the bridge and, you know, kill a Goblin Hut, but it definitely could use a little bit of love. The Baby Dragon is going back into the S tier. I don't know if I want to see a Baby Dragon nerf. Baby Dragon is one of those cards that it's really annoying to face if you have like a really common heavy deck, like with a lot of bait in it. None of the commons except for Rascals really work versus the Baby Dragon. So that is one annoying thing. I would like to see a common card that counters Baby Dragon, and then I would be happy with where the Baby Dragon is in the meta. The Dark Prince is going to go right alongside the Royal Ghost in the B tier. Doesn't fit into too many decks, but you can use it. The Battle Ram's also going into the B tier, pretty much only used in P.E.K.K.A. Bridge Spam. Goblin Hut's going in the Please Nerf tier. Oh my gosh, it is so annoying because Earthquake and Poison don't counter it. Like the cards that should counter it, they just don't. And that's why I hate the Goblin Hut right now. Like the cards that should counter it don't counter it. It has a little bit too much HP. I would like to see a slight HP nerf to the Goblin Hut. I like that it spawns with 3 Spear Goblins, but yeah, it just has too much HP. The Barbarians are a very good card. They're situational. I'm actually going to put them in the B tier just because they are so situational. But the thing is, they're like really underrated. And some people complained I stuck them in the A tier in the last video, which is why I'm sticking them in the B tier. They're really underrated and they're really good in a couple decks. Like they're just so strong. But if you have Fireball or an answer to them, then they can get off the map pretty quickly. Royal Hogs are going to, I think, yep, they're going to the A tier for me. In combination, well, just with the meta, with like the Heal Spirit, especially coming into the meta, and also they buffed the Royal Hogs relatively recently. I think they're a very good card right now. Ram Rider's going into the B tier. It's a very good card, but not quite on par with some of the A tier win conditions. The only reason it could honestly go in the A tier is just because the healer is so good, but without a healer, it would be in the B tier for sure. Inferno Tower, I'm going to stick in the B tier. It's kind of like a little bit worse than the Tesla right now, so it definitely deserves to be there. The Wizard is going to go into the not good tier. I mean, quite frankly, Musketeer is just better than Wizard. It only really works if your opponent doesn't have like a big spell, but anytime they have a big spell, they're just gonna, it's just like, you'd rather have the 1 elixir cheaper card because there's just going to be Fireball zapping it anyway, or whatever spell they use. The Minion Horde is going to go in the slight buff tier for me. And this is just because of arrows. Arrows are so popular, especially on ladder. Like Minion Horde is just, it's just so bad versus arrows. So that's why it's going there. Graveyard is one of the best win conditions right now. So definitely going in the above average tier, but I don't think that it needs a nerf or needs to be changed. The Electro Dragon, I'm actually going to stick in the B tier. It's a good card, but it really only fits with the Elixir Golem. Prince is going to go in the B tier for me. Again, it's kind of like a worse mini P.E.K.K.A. Executioner is going to go into the slightly buff category. It works in one deck. It works in Hog Executioner. Viper always finishes high with it on ladder, but yeah, that's literally the only deck it works in. And keep in mind, when I say it's the only deck it works in, I mean only meta deck. Like obviously you can use it in some off-meta graveyard deck, but you're not going to see it in the top 200 ladder. Rascals are going to go into the A tier, one of the best common cards in the game, Witch is going into the literally trash tier. I actually haven't really used Witch that much, so it's kind of hard to say how good Witch is, but if you look top 200, if you look grand challenges, nobody wins with a Witch. Like, never. And almost every other card in the game, you see someone win with it, but Witch is just like never ever won with. So that's why it's going there for me. The Bowler is going into the C tier, and it could use a little bit of a buff. Maybe even going down to 4 elixir. That would be interesting. It doesn't really even fit into any decks. It fits into some off meta decks. Giant is going to go into the B tier. The number 1 player last season actually finished high with Giant, but the only reason it works so well is just because of Magic Archer and Mini P.E.K.K.A. So I don't think it's the Giant that was powerful in that deck. I think it was the Magic Archer and Mini P.E.K.K.A. that were powerful. Balloon is going to go into the A tier for me. It's a very good win condition, and especially in this meta, it's a very good win condition. Cannon Cart just recently got a buff, and I really like it. I think the Cannon Cart is very good, fits into a couple decks in the game, so I'm going to put it in the A tier. Elixir Pump is going to go in the D tier for me. It's not that good, gets an even trade with any spell in the game, and it's not in your starting hand, so I don't think they should change it, but yeah, it's not the best card in the game. Expo is going into the A tier. I would like to see a tiny, maybe like a tiny HP reduction, but it's pretty well balanced. I'm going to put Royal Giant in the A tier. Last meta, I actually would have had it in the B tier, but there's kind of like a new Royal Giant Goblin Hut deck coming back. which I think is quite solid. So you can definitely see some people using it again, but it's not, I don't know. Should I even have it in the A tier? I'll leave it there, but it's almost in the B tier for me. Rocket is going to go in the B tier. It's good, but only fits into a couple decks. Sparky's going into the B tier. Good, but only fits in a couple decks. Actually, Lightning's moving down from the A tier to the B tier because it's not very good versus like Goblin Hut and Barbarian Hut, which are quite good in the meta. So Lightning doesn't make a whole lot of sense to run, although it still works. It's just maybe not the best in the meta. Elite Barbarians are terrible. They only work if they're overleveled. So if you say in the comments, oh, everyone in my trophy range is using Elite Barbarians, it's just because they're overleveled. They have higher level Elite Barbarians than your cards. So if you have the same level cards as their Elite Barbarians, you should be able to counter them. Giant Skeleton, it fits into like a couple decks, but again, it could take a slight buff and it would be okay, but I don't think they should change Giant Skeleton. The Goblin Giant is like, it's like a situational giant. It works well with Sparky, and it's a good card, but it doesn't fit in too many decks. But it's like, yeah, it's kind of like the same as the Giant. I kind of like the Goblin Giant. It's fine where it is. It's a little bit worse than Giant, but it's okay. So Lava Hound is going into the B tier for me. They did nerf it recently, which is why I'm moving it down a tier. But it's still good. You can still definitely use it. It's just a tiny bit worse, I think. Or some people would even say it's better, but overall, I think you're seeing it used a little bit less than it used to be. Mega Knight is going up into the A tier for me. It's just very good at what it's good at. It's like P.E.K.K.A, but with splash damage. And then speaking of P.E.K.K.A, P.E.K.K.A is going into the A tier. It's very good. No other card in the game can do what either of these cards do, which is why they're so good and so solid in the game. Royal Recruits are going in the D tier. They could use a little bit of a buff, and it would be okay, but also it's fine where they're at because depending on the meta, they sometimes come back into the game. Barbarian Hut is going into the A tier. It recently got a buff. They did a rework, and I think it's pretty balanced. I think it's okay. I don't know. It might deserve like a tiny HP nerf, just like the Goblin Hut, but it's not as good as the Goblin Hut. Golem is for me an A tier win condition. It's very good. It's very annoying when people go Golem first play in the back. They did also change Golem recently, and overall, I don't know if it really made it better or worse. I would say, I don't know, man, but some people finish high on ladder with Golem, so I think it's pretty good. And it's easy to pick up and play. Three Musketeers. What I'd like to see about the Three Musketeers, I don't know. It's kind of interesting because with Heal Spirit, they might actually come back into the meta a little bit, but they definitely could take a slight buff and it would be not bad for the game. And finally, we're going to have Mir go into the D tier. It's just not that good. 1 elixir more for 1 more level on your card. It kind of just takes up a deck slot and like makes your cycle awkward, but it does fit into like one deck played by like one player in the top 200, but no one else is using it. So that's going to wrap it up. Let me know what you thought on my tier list. Do you agree? Do you disagree? I'm hoping to make this a monthly series, so stay tuned, and Vulkan out.